We cannot get away from the fact that what the Chancellor is doing today is cleaning up the mess that was left by the last government. That's not just a sort of political game. That's not a sort of blame game that's supposed to, somehow help us win the next election. That is a real fact about the state of the government and the state of public policy in this country. And the Conservative Party were in government, but they stopped governing. And now Labour's Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is in an honest and transparent way cleaning up that mess.
When Rachel Reeves moved into her new office at the Treasury after Labour's landslide victory, she took down the picture of Nigel Lawson, who was Margaret Thatcher's Chancellor in the 1980s and an inspiration to many on the right. She's spoken of having smashed one of the last glass ceilings in politics by becoming the first female Chancellor. But Rachel Reeves is certainly following a path well trodden by her predecessors as she blames the previous government for the financial mess she says she's inherited. Gordon Brown promised to end Tory boom and bust when Labour swept to power in 1997. And of course, George Osborne wasted no opportunity to brandish Liam Byrne's note warning that there was no money left after he moved into number 11 in 2010. Well, over recent days, there's been much discussion of whether the state of the public finances was available to anyone who read the figures available from the Office for Budget Responsibility. The Tories deny covering up the scale of the problems, while Labour say the immediate shortfalls were only apparent once they'd carried out an audit across government departments. This particular argument is unlikely to last much longer, but the real debate will be on how much Labour will tax and spend in its first term in power for 14 years. The new Chancellor's heavily trailed speech this afternoon is intended to frame the political debate for years to come and is an attempt to explain to voters why Labour will not be able to deliver a swift transformation of our public services. Rachel Reeves is expected to point out that she was honest during the election campaign, warning that Labour would face the worst inheritance since the Second World War. But she and Keir Starmer also based their entire pitch on a promise of change. Few will have expected that to mean that their local bypass or hospital building programme would have to be scrapped. Labour's argument is that this is about fixing the foundations of our economy, but the big risk is that scrapping capital projects will not help the government to deliver on its prime objective of growing the economy. Tomorrow, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, will give details of controversial changes to planning rules, which are intended to give a boost to the nation's finances, as well as starting to ease the housing crisis. But the decision to accept above-inflation pay recommendations for millions of public sector workers and, as we've just heard, to give junior doctors a 20% pay rise over 2 years leave even less money to spend elsewhere. None of this will be easy, but when you've just been elected with a majority of more than 160, this is the time to make those much-discussed difficult choices. And of course, Labour's helped by the Tories' decision to spend months choosing who should lead them. Even when we get to the budget in the autumn, when the big decisions on whether to increase taxes will be announced, it will still be Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt who respond for the Conservatives as the various leadership contenders argue about the future direction of their party. Today, Kemi Badenoch becomes the latest to launch her bid to become leader of the opposition, setting out with an immediate swipe at her rivals, warning that it's not enough just to talk about unity. Well, there's no doubt that she would take the fight to the Tories if she wins, but some are already questioning whether her combative approach to some on her own side will prove a disadvantage during the long contest ahead. For now, at least, most voters will be paying scant attention to the fifth Tory leadership contest in 4 years. They'll be far more concerned about what the new government's plans will mean for their own families and businesses. So let's begin with that statement to Parliament from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves this afternoon, announcing a swathe of cuts to spending projects starting in the immediate financial year, accusing the previous government of covering up the true state of the public finances and running away. The Treasury's internal audit of what ministers call the black hole from unfunded and underfunded spending plans will be published, suggesting a gap of up to £20 billion. The opposition will say it's all part of a plan to prepare us all for taxes to be raised at the budget in the autumn. Let's talk to Josh Simmons, Labour MP for Makerfield. Josh, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you with us. Do you think voters will be disappointed that one of the first big acts from the Labour government is going to be to announce cuts to some of those local spending projects?
I think voters will hear today the Chancellor standing up and doing exactly what she promised to do, which is to run the economy with sound public finances. And I also think that voters will actually admire the contrast between this government that is willing to level with the public, to be honest with the public about what's going on underneath the surface, and the last Tory government, in which right across public spending departments, policies have been announced but not costed. They've been announced but not actually then developed. And that is costing the taxpayer money. And it is the Chancellor's job to be honest about that fact, to level with the public, to make tough choices, and then to build the sound public finances on which growth depends.
But even before the election, I mean, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, as I'm sure you're aware, Paul Johnson was warning about this conspiracy of silence on your side as well as on the Tory side about the state of the public finances and what either party could afford to offer.
There's no conspiracy whatsoever. Rachel Reeves was very clear through the whole election campaign that she expected that if Labour were lucky enough to be elected by the British people, that the public finances would be in a bad state. And so it has proved. I think what's changed, and this is important, is that there are policy commitments that have been announced by this government, not properly costed, not properly and transparently explained in terms of the spending implications over the medium term. And that's why the Chancellor has commissioned this audit to make sure we know the baseline that we are starting from. And actually, I sometimes wonder, what would you expect from the Chancellor other than to be honest about what that audit has shown and to be straightforward and transparent with the British people?
Josh, I know you're part of this new Labour growth group in Parliament. And of course, getting growth in our economy is one of the new Prime Minister and new Chancellor's overall objectives. Aren't you worried, though, that starting out by scrapping some of those projects to build new roads, bypasses and so on, to scrap part of the HS2 connections, to scrap some of the hospital building, will in itself damage growth in the economy?
Well, what the signatories of the letter that we sent to the Prime Minister are aligned around is the need to make tough political choices in order to deliver growth. And that is the single thing that repeatedly we have seen the now opposition, whether it's Greens or the Conservative Party, fail to do. They are happy to use the language and rhetoric of growth, but as soon as it comes to a specific case that might be difficult for a member of parliament in their constituency, or that might annoy a particular vocal lobby group, they backtrack, they reel back and they don't deliver it. And what we're saying
but
to the Prime Minister is...
But the Chancellor's going to announce exactly that, not delivering on some of those projects that are already in train.
No, what the Chancellor is doing is what we as signatories to the letter want this government to do, which is make upfront, tough choices that acknowledge difficult problems rather than try to sweep them under the carpet, which is what the last government did. And it's just, we cannot get away from the fact that what the Chancellor is doing today is cleaning up the mess that was left by the last government. That's not just a sort of political game. That's not a sort of blame game that's supposed to, somehow help us win the next election. That is a real fact about the state of the government and the state of public policy in this country. And the Conservative Party were in government, but they stopped governing. And now Labour's Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is in an honest and transparent way cleaning up that mess.
So she's going to have to find some money from somewhere. You clearly have these commitments not to raise the main rates of income tax, national insurance, VAT. Is this really preparing us for the fact that things like capital gains tax, perhaps even corporation tax, perhaps inheritance tax, will have to rise when we get to the budget, and we're expecting a date this afternoon for that budget in the autumn?
Well, as you said, today is about spending and not taxation. This is not a fiscal event. What this is about is setting the baseline for what's happening across government and being honest about that fact. What you will get from Labour all the way through the course of this parliament is the very thing that we think is fundamental to rebuilding trust in politics, which is we will do what we said we're going to do. And we promised no tax rises on working people, so we will not raise taxes on working people. We promised that we would be honest with the public about the state of public finances, and we are today being honest with the public about the state of public finances. And
But
that is
shouldn't you
what we will
also be
all.
honest then and say, look, this is going to mean tax rises? Look, we'll keep to those specifics about not putting up those particular main rates of income tax, but there are going to have to be tax rises elsewhere. Shouldn't the Chancellor just come out and say that this afternoon?
It wouldn't be honest to write a budget on the media months ahead of an actual budget. Because as we know from Liz Truss, if you write budgets in the media, it does not end well for mortgages and for working people. There's nothing honest about that. What Rachel Reeves has said really clearly is the commitment that this government will make is that we will not raise taxes on working people. What happens to public expenditure at the budget beyond that depends on all manner of things that the OBR have to look at and that the Treasury have to analyse, and then they update the public once they have done that. So
But
I
she's
think
given the
there's.
broad scale of the black hole, so surely she can just point to where she's going to be looking in order to fill that hole. Is it going to mean a new programme of austerity for unprotected departments? Is that could affect another part of the NHS? All that and much more after the headlines from Martin Williams. Is she prepared to relax her fiscal rules, or is she, as most people expect, going to be putting up taxes, not perhaps those specifics on income tax, national insurance and VAT, but there are plenty of other taxes as well. And shouldn't she be making that clear this afternoon? I'm not asking you to do it on the media, but she could do it in Parliament this afternoon, couldn't she?
Well, if she were to do that, she would be making the same mistake that the Conservative Party did with Liz Truss, which was to have a fiscal event without the OBR properly costing that event. And we all know what happened after they did that. Mortgage rates went through the roof, and working people right across the country ended up paying more out of their pocket to do that. So you will always see the same thing. The Labour Party in government will do what it promised to do during the campaign, and the Labour Party in government will take governing very seriously. And it is not responsible government to announce tax changes to try to do a fiscal event when there actually is no fiscal event and the OBR have not done the analysis that underpins it. And that's why what Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has said is we need to get an audit of everything happening across government to know what our baseline is, to know what the mess is that we now have to clear up so that we can then move forward towards the budget and to deliver the growth that we were elected to deliver.
Josh Simons, Labour MP for Makerfield.